When you sign up for services like Marvel Unlimited and DC Universe Infinite and even Comixology Unlimited, it's really hard to know where to start. Today, I'm going to break down some of the comics that I would recommend to new users for DC Universe Infinite. First up, I'll start with Superman. He is one of DC's biggest heroes, part of their trinity, and with this character in particular, there are so many comics. You have some heroes who have, maybe a short list of comics, and then you have Superman, who has one of the longest lists of comics, but there are a couple that don't really require you to dive into continuity or even to know everything about Superman's backstory that you might need to know if you just sort of jump in the middle somewhere. So the first comic I want to recommend is All-Star Superman. It's just a classic. I think it's definitely a go-to rec for a lot of people, and you know what? I understand why. And I'm not doing this video to try and recommend sort of things that are in the deep, dark depths of DC Universe Infinite, although that might be a good idea. And you can really just jump into All-Star Superman, and once it's done, you don't have to worry about, oh, am I missing this story that comes after? Did I miss something that comes before? It's very well contained, and that's also why I want to recommend Superman for all seasons. Now, Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale will come up again in a little bit, so don't worry. I still have, one more comic to recommend from that creative team, which is a creative team I really enjoy. Superman for all seasons, I like it because it actually takes you through, what his life is like during different seasons, and you kind of get this full year-round look at the character in a nice, concise story. To continue with the Trinity, I want to talk about Wonder Woman next, because George Perez does some amazing work, and I have the first volume in a physical copy of his Wonder Woman work, and it was a really, really great read, and you can tell that his stories have inspired so many others. If you want something more recent, I really, really recommend Sensational Wonder Woman. What they're doing is they're doing, 1 to 2 issue story arcs with different creative teams for each little story, and they aren't massive issues. If you read it on the app, you'll notice that it's kind of being presented to you almost half a page at a time, which is different. It's not something I expected, and DC's been doing a ton of digital first, so there's always new stuff being put on the app, and you actually can't get it in physical form at a comic book shop. So if you are going to invest in DC Universe Infinite, definitely check out some of those digital firsts. Sensational Wonder Woman has been fun. You have some playful stories, you have some more serious stories, but it gives you a very well-rounded look at the character. And again, you don't really have to worry about continuity with that one. So it's nice to kind of just be able to pop in and out of stories and not feel like you're missing something necessarily. All right, let's talk about Batman now. This is where my other Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale recommendation comes in, because Batman the Long Halloween is one of my personal favorites. I really, really love that this story is going by the calendar year. They are covering, these stories based on the holidays, and it adds this horror element that I really love when it comes to comics, and especially superhero comics. I think there are a lot of characters that you can add that horror element really well to their stories, and Batman is obviously one of them, being, kind of a bat. And it just fits so well with the way that the story was written and the art style that you're seeing. So I highly, highly recommend that. It's obviously for, more mature readers. So if you have kids or teenagers who are going to be reading the comics, maybe put that one to the side for now. I'm also a huge fan of Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's run, because it was really the first Batman run I had read. I didn't get into comics until around the New 52 era, and I was just really impressed with how Scott took things from the Court of Owls and progressed the story through the end, and did some things that I didn't really expect to see, honestly, when it came to Batman and what we typically think of when we think of his story. And I also thought the Court of Owls were just a fantastic addition to this sort of massive rogues gallery that Batman already has. And I do love that you can sort of jump in, and if you don't read all 12 or 13 trades or whatever it is, I forget exactly how many issues that ends up adding up to, but you can read Court of Owls and get something out of that, and then you can return to it in a bit if you don't have time to read an entire run. But that is definitely one I highly recommend as well. But I don't want to just recommend comics for Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman, because those are definitely the obvious choices, but DC Universe Infinite has so much more to offer. I already mentioned how much I enjoy horror, so I want to recommend the Hill House comics. And again, you don't have to read everything. I'll give you a couple here, like Basket Full of Heads was one of my favorites. That one was written by Joe Hill with art by Leo Max, and it had this very, Jaws vibe to it because it takes place on an island during the summer, towards the end of summer, and they're getting ready to kind of go back to the off season, and you have some crazy things happening in that one. I would also recommend the Lola Woods, which is by Carmen Maria Machado and with art by Danny. And I thought this one was very reminiscent of kind of Paper Girls and Stranger Things almost. It has, sort of this creepy element to it, but you have two kids who are sort of working out their friendship, and you have the fact that, this is in a town where they can kind of just ride their bikes around, and their parents kind of worry, but it's still, very much coming of age vibes where the kids get to just go do their own thing and you don't have to worry about it too much. And there's definitely some spooky things happening in the town. So, that is where the horror element comes into it. But I really, really enjoyed those two. And, there are a few other titles on Hill House. So kind of take a look and see what might be best for you if you are a horror fan, because as horror fans know, there are so many different types of stories that you can tell within that genre, as with any genre. But, if you are a fan of some of the darker stuff, I would definitely lean towards Hill House comics. Honestly, I could probably sit here and recommend comics all day, but if you'll just hang in there with me for a few more minutes, I do have some others that I would love to recommend, one of which is Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen. This kind of ties to Superman, obviously, because Jimmy Olsen is a pretty big side character in Superman's story, but I love the way that this focuses on Jimmy, and it is entertaining. It's 12 issues. You don't have to, spend too much time with this one because it is such a fun, easy read. And, you have Jimmy going through some perilous things. It's kind of got a little bit of everything for superhero fans. And I think it's just such a great addition to the DC comics recently. Another somewhat horror-related recommendation is Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. I read this recently, and if you want something that you can really dig into a little more and just, spend a little more time with, because if you have gone back and read some older comics, you probably have noticed that they are a little wordier than new ones, and it'll take you a little longer to get through this one, but I think it is very much worth it. It was a fantastic read, and if you want to get into Swamp Thing, I really do think that is sort of the best starting point. And don't think I forgot about the kids. I did not. A couple that I would recommend are Crypto the Superdog and Scooby-Doo. I believe there are 3 or 4 Scooby-Doo titles, so this would sort of just be the main one, and they do have, age ranges on the comics when you go into the app. Some will say 0+, some will say 12+, sort of more mature titles will make note of that as well. But Scooby-Doo is, a classic, and you really can't go wrong. There's also Scooby-Doo Team Up where they'll have, Batman and Robin on. I think that one's listed at 12+, but I still think a lot of the Scooby-Doo comics are great reads for kids. That's definitely a good starting point. There's some other stuff if you really dig into the app, but I wanted to sort of cover the bases here with a variety of recommendations. So, there's also comic book events, and I guess if I were to recommend a few of those as someone who's not a huge fan of comic book events, I would consider checking out, Crisis on Infinite Earths and Final Crisis. I would also recommend checking out a book like Kingdom Come, which isn't necessarily this big massive event, but you'll see a bunch of heroes there, and there's just so much that you could dive into in the app. Hopefully this was a decent starting point if you are a fan of superheroes or horror, and that is all I have for you today. If you like this video, hit the like button, share it, hit the subscribe button, and you can follow me on social media. There are links in the show description for that, as well as links to my podcasts, Welcome to Geekdom and Chat Cemetery. Thank you all for watching. I will see you next time.